Okay. We are joined today by a very good friend of mine who I respect very, very much, who happens to be located here in my home state of Mississippi, William McKinley, who is the director of the Whitetail Deer Program in the state of Mississippi for MDWFP. William, thank you for joining me.
I'm glad to be here, Ashley.
Can you tell us your full title?
I'm the Deer Program Coordinator with the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries and Parks. I've been around the agency now for 24 years and working in the deer program for 22 of that.
And it is an excellent program, I might add. Our
Thank
deer
you.
are thriving here. I have asked you to join me, and you and I talk frequently and have over the years. I've worked in a number of different roles with regard to wildlife in Mississippi and conservation, but every single time I talk with you, I learn something. Every single time, no matter how, no matter how frequently. And so I always enjoy whatever tidbit you have to share with me, and often it is me calling you, asking you questions about things, because you always have an answer and you've been around so long. Our program is so good, and where we are located in the country, I would say, and I'll let you weigh in on this, we are at the battle line of CWD. I mean, we've got it, but we're not covered up by it. We
Right.
have what, 82 counties in Mississippi?
82 counties, and we found it in 16 of those counties so far.
Okay. And we're fighting it really hard. I mean,
We're trying, yes, and we fight it primarily through public education, like we're doing right now. And I speak with all of my neighboring states. We speak frequently throughout the Southeast. We have a every other month CWD call for all the southeastern states where we catch each other up on the newest research. I would say that the information sharing about this disease is much bigger than what the average person probably realizes.
right. I think that is completely true. And there's so much the public doesn't know. And I think some people want to know, and I would probably wager to say some people don't want to know. Um,
Well, yes, I mean it's no one wants to find CWD on their property, and that prevents a lot of people. It causes a lot of people to choose not to get a deer sampled because, and to some degree, I realize that it's kind of like finding out a, a cancer diagnosis. No one wants to. However, we also know that if you find CWD early, you have a lot more options toward managing that disease. So we encourage people to sample. We encourage across our entire state. We do statewide sampling every year. Some states tend to rotate around the state, their particular state. We try to sample the entire state every year, and uh, we don't charge hunters for sampling in Mississippi. We actually get monies from our legislature that helps us in just CWD cost. So that money actually goes to provide hunters with the ability to get their deer tested and it be no cost to them.
and how does our sampling program work? I mean, how do they do it? I mean, how do they get their deer sampled here?
So we have drop off freezers across the state, almost one per county. I think we have 60 freezers. A hunter can harvest a deer, an antlerless deer, a antlered deer, and remove the antlers and drop the head of that deer in that freezer, drop a sample in that freezer. We run those freezers weekly, every Monday. Or our bread and butter now turned out to be our taxidermists. And we're getting about 75 to 80% of our samples from taxidermists now across the state. We're working with right at 100 taxidermists, and they turn in a lot of samples. This disease is more prevalent in older age class bucks, so that's the best place to get those samples. And we're paying taxidermists a fee for every sample they collect, and it works well. They're
Yeah.
finding a lot of positives for us.
That's good. That's good, because the more we know, the better we can fight it. You mentioned that you talk regularly to the other agencies and
Mhm.
the I think it's all gentlemen, I think, in the other states. In your position, what states are those?
Oh, well, basically the entire Southeast.
Mhm.
We'll start all the way on the East Coast with West Virginia and their deer coordinator. They have a large scale deer GPS collar research project ongoing, and I keep up with the results of it. Part of it's in their CWD zone, which, by the way, at latest reports, CWD of their 100 plus collared deer in the CWD zone, CWD was killing more than hunters are in that particular area. So it's very high prevalence in that endemic area there. And take that all the way to my friends in Texas, who I was speaking with a few days ago. We all talk about this disease, and Georgia just found it, and we extend our help to them. And anytime a new state picks it up, where Arkansas did it to us, as soon as we found it, they extended help, offered to come over, help us. We had meetings with them on how they handled it the first year or two, and extremely helpful. We try to pay that favor across. And just last week, I attended a public meeting in Alabama. They had found a new county. We're having a public meeting, and I went up and sat on a panel to help answer questions from their public there. So.
Yeah. And everyone isn't always excited to see you somewhere, right? In Mississippi.
No, no, they're not. But unfortunately, this disease, it brings a host of emotions with it. Um, deer are deer are really important to all of our states. They're important to us from a financial point of view. They're important to individuals from a financial point of view. It may be investments in a property because of the quality of deer that are there. They drive up the cost of a property, whether it be the lease cost or the purchase cost. And then they're very important to venison, as venison to us. I was looking at some numbers. I gave a presentation last night, and the amount of deer we're harvesting in the state of Mississippi equals to well over 10 million pounds of venison. And we only have 3 million people in the state, Ashley. When you start thinking of how important a food resource is that. So,
It's I do not think that people realize how important that resource is for
mhm.
feeding Mississippi families. And do you have any idea how that compares to other protein sources in Mississippi?
Well, I pulled up USDA's numbers from Mississippi and did a comparable year. And Mississippi was producing about 8.5 million pounds of red meat in the form of beef, pork, veal, mutton, and lamb. So venison exceeded that total output, according to the USDA numbers. So how important is that again as a food source?
So Mississippians are producing, they're harvesting and consuming more venison than they are all other forms of red meat combined.
Producing, yes. I can't say consuming because a lot of
Right.
that red meat is
They sit in the
produced
freezer. Yeah.
and outside and brought in, but as far as produced in the state of Mississippi, more deer than other red meat sources, and that's big.
That's big. That's huge. And that's why you guys are working so hard to fight to make sure CWD doesn't spread across
Hmm.
the rest of the state. So, one thing that's interesting to me when you look at a map of Mississippi, um, the largest concentration of CWD counties is up there across the Tennessee border,
Right.
where we know that that's where we believe our first CWD case came from. Can you kind of walk us through that, how we got CWD in the state, and then also can you talk about the one county that we have way down on the coast where we have a positive and at least the theory as to how CWD appeared so far away from the other counties.
So we'll start with the area in the north. Our first detection was in the South Delta near Vicksburg.
Hmm.
We found that one, and we then ramped up the sampling and quickly found one in North Mississippi, 200 miles away, I might add.
And
So
and
we
I
said, "Oh
know
wow!"
I know the prevailing theory as to where that one outside Vicksburg came from. Can you tell people, do we know, or where do we think that came
We
from?
don't know. We can, usually when you look at large scale movements of CWD, we figure that may be human induced movement, whether that's carcass, whether it's live deer, whether it's some type of human induced jump. We know that CWD in North Mississippi appears to be spreading at a rate of a few miles per year, and suddenly you make a 180-mile jump, then we don't think that was the deer walk that far. We think that
Hmm.
was human aided in spreading that disease. And whether that be in a live deer, whether it be in a dead deer carcass, we don't know. We know that the outbreak in North Mississippi we share with southwestern Tennessee. The deer don't know the state line. It's affected many counties in Tennessee and Mississippi. That area in the Delta tends to be divided into two areas. It appears there are two separate outbreaks. We have one outbreak there in the South Delta and one about 25 miles below that in Claiborne County, Mississippi. And we just picked up another positive there yesterday. That's one last year. And by the way, research from Mississippi State University looking at scrape research and beginning to sample some environmental samples for CWD. We picked CWD up in Claiborne County first by sampling a scrape. Later, a few months later, we picked up our first positive deer, and that was last season. This season, we picked up 3 more in that same area. So,
And I hate to hear that because the county that I hunt in, our property is adjacent to Claiborne County. So I
yeah,
hate to hear of any new positives in Claiborne County. I'm going to backtrack for 1 second for anyone who may be new to hunting whitetail, or just now learning about CWD. You mentioned you picked up the first Claiborne County positive in a scrape. And
hmm
can you tell us and tell the listeners? I know most people listening will know this, but there may be a few who don't. Um, what are all the ways that we can detect CWD, and also
So
how it's spread?
we, for our testing in Mississippi, we primarily use the retropharyngeal lymph nodes. They sit under the chin of the deer, and those are sampled at the Mississippi State University Veterinary Diagnostic and Research Lab in Pearl. So wonderful relationship we have there. They're only 15 minutes from our central office. They send a courier over to pick our samples up every few days. So it's a wonderful relationship. And we get a really quick turnaround from them. We're very pleased with that relationship. When we find a new positive somewhere, anything that would set up new regulatory action, a new CWD zone, expand the zone, we send that sample off for confirmatory testing through a different type test, usually to the National Veterinary Services Laboratory in Ames, Iowa. So if it comes back positive there, we call it a confirmed positive. We've recently began with some research testing through RT Quick, a real-time quaking-induced conversion test. And that test is not USDA approved, so we do not set regulations by a positive on that test. However, we are using it for research purposes, exploratory purposes in areas, trying to see how far CWD has spread out from the positive deer we find. And as we begin to sample, after Louisiana found it on the west side of the river,
Mm-hmm.
about 25 miles south of where we had found it, we decided to sample the east side of the Mississippi River and see if the disease had indeed crossed the river. And we quickly found a positive scrape. And after those results, sampling increased in that area and we picked up a positive deer. Then sampling increased even more and we picked up 3 positive deer. So we're sharing that outbreak with Louisiana there along the river. As deer are routinely seen crossing the Mississippi River. And so that's kind of the process we're going through. We have our testing for hunters, and then we have our research testing that's ongoing in different places. Just yesterday, I was in the assistant deer coordinator, Cayman Campbell, and I were out collecting scrape samples yesterday on a property. So
Okay. And CWD can live in dirt, leaves, I mean,
So
scrapes.
the prion is not alive. That's why you can't kill it. It exists. It has to be denatured through extremely high heat,
Mhm.
or chemicals such as bleach will denature it, but it persists in the environment for quite a while. So when a deer makes a scrape, the theory was, well, we know it's passed through urine, feces, saliva. If a deer is urinating in this spot, that he comes and works the soil and works an overhanging branch. And it's kind of like the post there that every dog walks by and urinates on. So when a deer walks into a food plot, you have that scrape on the corner of the food plot, and most of the bucks, if not all, that are using that area are going to walk by and leave their scent there. It's just they're marking that spot, letting them know they're there. So we get that accumulation. It doesn't tell us which deer was positive through the RT Quick. It just tells us if the prions are present there. At this point, we don't know how long that would persist in that scrape. If a deer urinated in it 3 years ago and was positive, are we picking that up as positive? I don't know. But I can tell you we are finding positive scrapes in areas where we found positive deer, and we're finding positive scrapes and then subsequently testing and finding positive deer. So the technique is helping. It's helping aid us in where this disease is.
That's great. You mentioned the CWD zone in the management plan. Mississippi has had a management plan for quite some time, and a good
Mhm.
one. Now, I know, unfortunately, not this current commission, but some past commissions made some changes to the plan against the recommendation of you and your team and the biologists at the agency. And I don't think those have been reversed, but we still have a relatively good management plan. I would say
We do. We have a
probably could be
sound
better.
management plan in
Yeah.
existence, and it was developed with the help of state and federal personnel from numerous sources out there. And I feel that plan is very strong, but it constantly needs updating. As we learn more and more about CWD, there's 2 summers ago, I was able to go and was asked to sit on a panel at the International CWD Convention in Denver. Big honor for me. So I get there, and I was amazed at how many researchers there were. I knew research was ongoing on this disease, but I guess just seeing that all gathered up in one room, it kind of shocked me as to how much research is ongoing on this disease, from looking at all the different potential aspects, to the threat to humans, to the threat to livestock, to how development of a vaccine, the attempts to do that, to trying to figure out the true mechanisms of spread of the disease. There's still a lot we don't know, but there's so much more we do just in the past couple of years.
Speaking of the threat to humans, so far CWD has not jumped to humans.
Correct.
However, it has jumped species, and it seems to be an evolving disease, unfortunately. And I think we need to be on guard against that. Could you talk a little bit about the studies with the macaques and how previously it didn't jump and then it did, and what species it has jumped to?
Yeah, and I'm certainly not the best expert on this by any means. Not an expert on it even, much less the best. But they are seeing the disease spread to some other species, mostly in lab settings where they're exposed to it. They have introduced it to some animals that did get it, such as voles, some that did not get it.
A
But
vole's like a little rat, right? Kind of
right,
like a
like a
little, yeah.
small rat with a short tail, not a mole that tunnels underground, but so they have introduced it to them. The thing that we're beginning to learn is it appears to be multiple strains of CWD in existence. And we're participating in some CWD strain typing research. We don't have concrete results yet, but we have suggestive data to show that we may have different strains in Mississippi. And none of that is conclusive, but we're working on that with USGS right now and their Emerging Disease Center. And so what one strain may do appears to be different than what another strain may do. So susceptibility to one strain may be higher or lower to another species. So we really, once again, I stress, we're learning a lot about this disease.
So different strains, like different strains of the flu, like type A
Similar,
and type
yeah.
B. So how many strains of CWD do we know about?
At last discussion with the professor there, it appears to be 9. Possibly 9 different strains. The ones in Northern Europe appear to be different. And I don't understand fully what a different strain means. Is an animal immune to a strain? Can they be completely resistant? There's never been any complete immunity shown in whitetail deer, to my knowledge, at this point of any CWD exposure. There are deer that are resistant but not immune, meaning it seems to take a higher load of prions and they appear to hold the disease longer in the incubation period. But we don't know at what point they're fully spreading the prions, what strain that might be. There's a lot we don't understand about this disease. There's a lot of research that I think if you ask these same questions in 5 years, I think we're going to be able to answer a lot of this.
What is our predominant strain in Mississippi?
So the strain in whitetails is commonly called the Wisconsin strain. And that was the strain that I sent off tissue and we coded. It appeared to link back to. Okay. So that's the strain that appears to be in North Mississippi, but the ones in South Mississippi could potentially be a different one. Can't say that for sure yet.
Speaking of South Mississippi, we didn't talk about that positive in Hancock County. So Hancock County, for people who aren't familiar with Mississippi geography, is a coastal county. That county is very far from all of the other counties in which we've had positives. What's your theory on how that one got there?
Once again, I think that if we're looking at long distance jumps in CWD across this country, they're going to be human induced jumps, whether that be live deer, whether it be dead deer, whether it be carcasses, it's most likely human induced. I can't put my finger on exactly how, but
and William, you sound very, very much like a scientist right now, talking about a human-induced jump. I am going to talk not like a scientist for a second, since I'm not one.
It means that people moved something down there that infected other deer, whether that be they brought a carcass back or someone chose to move live deer in that area, which that area of the state is an area where we have caught and convicted people for moving live deer into that state. Into that area in multiple enclosures down there. People have been prosecuted for it.
They've been moving deer between high fences and pens.
Right, and several of those deer came from CWD positive areas of the country. In the past, these movements that were convicted were happening back in about a decade ago. So one of the fences that had moved deer from CWD linked areas was even destroyed by a tornado, and all the deer were released into the free range. About a mile of the fence went down. So bottom line is we don't know that particular fence owner was convicted and of bringing in deer illegally into the state. So potentially that's how it got there, but I can't say for sure.
But we don't know for sure. Right.
And probably we'll never know for sure.
No, probably not. I mean, it's pretty easy to connect the dots. I mean, so for our listeners, moving live deer across state lines is a violation of the Lacey Act. And we also have a prohibition in Mississippi that says you cannot move live deer yourself within the state unless it's for research purposes in Mississippi State, or if you there's an exception built in for research purposes. That is not necessarily the case in all states. I think Mississippi has some of the more restrictive laws regarding the transport of deer and what we commonly call deer farming, raising deer, high fence enclosure rules and regulations. High fences are not outlawed, of course, in Mississippi. Look, we believe in constitutional rights. You can do what you want on your property. But if you're going to build a high fence, we have really strong rules and regulations about then what you have to do to take care of the wildlife that you have enclosed. And I think those rules are designed both to protect and take care of the wildlife that you've enclosed, as well as the animals on the outside of the pen,
Correct.
to prevent things like we just talked about.
Mm.
But some of our surrounding states do not have as prohibitive regulations, I would say. In your opinion, just so we'll put aside pens for a second, what is the fastest way to spread CWD? How do deers, like, what's the biggest method of an outbreak?
A positive deer coming into direct contact with a non-positive deer. Saliva is shown to carry the highest load of prions of all the different bodily fluids. That study was out fairly recently. So when deer come into close, concentrated contact with one another, and a positive deer comes into contact with a non-positive, the chances of that deer spreading that disease go up very, very much.
And so deer don't ordinarily come into close concentrated contact with each other that often. I mean, like on a mass scale. So is that one of the reasons why when a positive happens in Mississippi and in many states, that county goes into the CWD management zone and feeding is then outlawed in that county?
Yes, that is why. And so I'll back up to Mississippi State again. And a couple of years ago, on some properties in North Mississippi, in Benton County, we have properties in our two, I'll call them hottest counties, where over half of the deer they're harvesting are positive now. Some properties, all of the deer they've harvested the past couple of years have been positive. So we funded a study with MSU and permitted a study with MSU, you might say, where we took new feeders right out of the box, gravity type feeders, and we put them on properties with very high CWD prevalence. 3 properties, 7 feeders, and we put corn in those feeders. We swabbed them right the day they were put up, and we were testing for prions on the mouth, the funnel, the actual spout of the feeders. And every one of those feeders was positive within a few months.
Within a few months?
Yes.
Which
So
means
we
that
put them up in September. They were swabbed every 6 weeks. I think by the second swabbing, so 12 weeks in, all of the feeders were positive.
And I think that this is so important. I mean, as a deer hunter and someone who has I have 2 little boys who love to hunt deer. I just think that if you are in an area of the country where there is a potential for CWD, one, to spread, or whether you already have it, or whether you're at the edge of the line, to consider whether putting up a feeder that could spread an outbreak of CWD to the deer population in your area is that important and outweighs the risks that you are undertaking. I mean, to me, it's just crazy. It's just crazy to me because hasn't the science shown that food plots are just as effective as feeders?
Well, we radio collared a lot of adult bucks, and they tended to use feeders more in daylight use food plots more during the daylight than they used the feeders. And I want to specify, when I said positive feeders, we were able to detect CWD prions by swabbing the rim of those feed spouts. So the way I explain it to landowners, Ashley, on the risk, putting up a feeder is a risk. You take a risk to gain a benefit. We do that in life all the time. We make a choice to cross the street. We make a choice to go to work. There is risk in everything that we do. So what benefit are you getting by putting the feeder up? And is it worth the risk that you are taking? If you are near a CWD area, you've got to assume that at some point in the near future, deer are moving across the landscape. Deer that are CWD positive and deer that are CWD negative are moving across the landscape. If one that is positive, and by the way, we had some GPS collars on some deer in Mississippi and showed that most of them are going 5 miles or more. At some point, they make a move, especially the bucks. We had one doe go 23 miles in one direction and 14 miles in another direction. And by the way, she was GPS collared within a few hundred yards of where a CWD positive was caught. She went into neighboring counties, 2 different neighboring counties in different directions. So knowing that that risk is there, eventually a positive deer is going to walk across that property. I think, unfortunately, in neighboring counties to CWD zones, that's inevitable. Deer are moving. We're not going to stop that. Deer move across the landscape. They're carrying, some of them are carrying the disease. When you have that feeder, if that deer stops on your property, you have a higher risk of it leaving CWD on that property. That's the risk you have to assume, that the disease is moving. Now, our rate of spread has been increasing at a very rapid rate. We have seen one county in Mississippi has gone from 1 in 18 deer to 1 in 4 deer in 6 years. Another county has gone from 1 in 35 deer to 1 in 7 deer in that same 6-year period. And statewide, we've gone from 1 in 500 deer to 1 in 54 deer. So almost a 10-fold increase there in that same 6-year window. So when we look at that and we know that we have a lot of feed, and we also have a very high deer density, a very high deer density. Our numbers are showing we may have, it looks like, more deer than we've ever had in the state. That's both a good and a bad thing. Too many deer cause trouble.
Right.
But
You and I have talked
density
about this
also
privately.
appears to be spreading this disease fairly rapidly. And we did, through MSU, do some feeder counts last deer season, where we flew transects statewide, 1,200 miles of transects, and found that we have the feeders we could see from the plane. We counted and recorded and then extrapolated over the rest of the state. And we have about a feeder for about every 13 deer statewide. That's a lot of feeders.
That's a lot of feeders.
That's what we could see. We couldn't see the ones in the woods. We could only see the ones in the openings. So,
So what can people do to combat this? I mean, if people are not in CWD zones, or even if they are, what's our biggest weapon?
Finding it early is a huge weapon, and education, because
and then once you find it, though, what do? Shoot more deer? I mean,
So for one thing, stop unnatural congregation. We can leave supplemental feeders, any of that out of the mix here. When you're congregating deer in a tight quarters, it's just natural to assume we're going to spread the disease faster.
Yeah. So stop feeding.
They are going to spread
it.
So
feeding.
So number one would be to stop feeding, and mineral licks and et cetera. But also we're recommending increased harvest. We started a campaign 2 years ago to try to get hunters to harvest more deer statewide. Not a tremendous high number, just the average hunter in Mississippi harvests 1.6 deer. We would like to see that as about 2.2 to 2.4. So if we could get the hunters that are harvesting 1 to shoot 2, and it's very liberal bag limit across the state, ranging from 6 deer in one portion of the state to 14 deer in the other portion of the state. So within that bag limit, if they're shooting 2, we would like them to harvest 1 more. And that would get us to the point we need to stop herd growth. We need to bring it back down to where it was just a few years back, a decade ago.
And you really want people to shoot does, right? Because
we do.
finding
We
that
do.
people are
We have a
not, everybody thinks their neighbors are shooting does and nobody's shooting does, right?
we have a lot of antlerless deer harvested. We are harvesting. I got to give hunters the credit here. In our state, hunters do harvest more does than bucks in our state for the past over a decade.
Okay.
That's good, but it's still just not quite enough. We're seeing that harvest is staying just below herd growth, just barely. It's trickling up a few percent every year. And, you know, Ashley, we're harvesting, our numbers last year just from licensed hunters were 272,000 deer harvested across the state. It's a lot of deer being harvested out there, but
Yes. And it needs to be more.
it does need to be more.
And look, I understand. I mean, once you filled your freezer, and I think this is generally a good thing, you hate to just kill, but I think there are so many families out there that are happy to have you give them a deer.
Mm-hmm.
Processing costs are expensive. Like
Yes.
you and I have talked about previously, there are not enough processors in the state. They're going out of business faster than we have new processors
Mm-hmm.
open. I think this is a huge opportunity for people who want to earn extra income or start a business because so many processors are already full this season. I mean, they have
Mm-hmm.
more business than they can take. So if anybody knows how to process their own meat out there who's listening in Mississippi and probably other states, I would imagine as well, gosh, I think you should get into this business because we sure do need more processors. And Hunter's Harvest, the Hunter's Harvest program, we've got one in Mississippi. It is relatively small right now. We only have about 30 processors. We could triple, quadruple that. I just found out that in Louisiana, the legislature gives $250,000 a year to the Hunter's Harvest
Oh,
program.
wow.
And
That's nice.
so they're able to pay the processors more and have so many more processors. So I think that's something you and I may need to tag our legislators in Mississippi, try
Yeah.
to get, because if people had a mechanism to donate many more of these deer, we could feed so many more hungry people. And I think people would
Mm-hmm.
kill a few more deer each year,
And I'll
especially with
throw
their kids.
one other thing out there. Just recently, we shot a video in with Mossy Oak and the Mississippi State University Meat Lab. Used a muscle biologist and the head of the MSU Meat Lab, and we took a deer just as a hunter would have quartered in a cooler. We took a deer that had been harvested the day before and iced, and the Cuz Strickland with Mossy Oak asked him the questions, and it was a great video. They took each section of the animal, the hind quarter, the shoulder, the back strap, and they broke it down into the usable portions, right down to here's how you cut it, here's how you trim it, here's how you grind it, and here's how you wrap it and put it in your freezer. And we did all that on a kitchen counter
No
to
way.
show that it can be done pretty well anywhere.
Okay, I want to
If
watch
some,
that.
yeah,
Where can
so
people find that?
that will be on our website and mdwfp.com.
Is it out yet?
I'll check and make sure. It was supposed to be right before Christmas, but I'll
Okay.
check and double. But
Okay. So probably if you Google MDWFP, Mississippi State Meat Lab, Cuz Strickland,
that's
it'll
right.
come. Okay, that sounds fantastic. We need more things like that. My husband always gets really frustrated with me. We don't process our own meat. And I always send him, because usually he drives it for me after we field dress it. He usually drives it with this very unusual list of cuts that I want because I like to cook. I don't just want ground meat. I want all sorts of strange cuts. I've got my meat eater cookbook and I'm out there trying all the recipes. But there are so many things you can do with it. I mean, think of it like a cow. There's just endless things that you can
Well,
do.
I have processed my own meat for many, many years. And I learned a lot watching this video. Like, I had no idea where the flat iron steak was, where it came from. Off the shoulder, by the way, off the shoulder blade. I had
Okay.
no idea that it was also known as the second most tender cut from the animal. I did not know that. So I was processing a deer this year, decided to prove it to myself, and took one that I had just trimmed off, threw it in a skillet with a little butter, and just seared it on both sides. And it was a wonderfully tender cut that I have often just pushed into grind meat.
Really?
So learned a lot.
Well, William, maybe in your retirement, you could open up a specialty processing meat venison butcher shop for
Uh,
people. But I am excited to watch that video. What is your favorite thing to cook with venison? I know you shoot them, you eat them. What's your favorite recipe?
that's the meat on my table at home. My favorite is I grill either the inner loins or a piece of backstrap over open coals on a oak or cherry fire.
Well, that
And
sounds delicious.
it is sliced thin across, but um, that's my favorite, and I do that quite regularly. So I
Yeah.
actually have some where I did it this weekend. So,
So while I've got you on here and we've got a few more minutes, you also help with some private land management.
mhm.
Don't you? You consult with different landowners and on their best management practices. So can you give us, because I think this applies to much of the southern region of the United States, give us some of your top land management tips for cultivating wildlife.
So
And I'm putting you on the spot here because I know this wasn't in our, we're going to talk
yeah,
about this.
and that's something I used to do a whole lot of, and now I do much less of. But um, one of the big mistakes I guess I see in land management, as far as deer management goes, in Mississippi, and this would be
Mhm.
very different state to state, but people think that everything has to be planted in trees. And if they have an opening or an old field or something, that is providing so much natural food. Those edge effect and just managed openings are wonderful areas to for many different types of game and non-game animals. But quite often I would go to a property and they said, "Well, I had this pasture and it was growed up, so I decided to plant it in trees." And you had 292 acres of trees. You didn't need three more.
Right.
So
Right.
it
Right. That could have
was
been a natural food plot.
that's exactly and helping people manage those openings either through fire, through disking, through mowing, or their combination thereof. That's an important the edge effect. The properties that I work with that are growing some of the best deer have a tremendous number of edge. If you look at it from an aerial photo, you'll see it. It is just broken into small blocks with little lanes all through it. And that edge
Mhm.
effect, it helps all the pretty well most of the wildlife out there.
And
So
those deer
that's
love to come out from those woods right at dusk
they
and right at
do, but
sunrise and
they
feed
use
right on
those
the edge of those
edges, and
spots.
so do the turkeys as they need escape cover, and they're bringing their poults out or quail chicks. This property has a fair number of quails still. It has a tremendous turkey flock, and it's a great place for whitetail as well. So it's that would be number one. Number two is trying to hold too many deer on a property.
Mhm.
And that's a common thing in a state where deer numbers are at a near all time record high. Uh, we just have too many deer. They're eating up a lot of the higher quality vegetation, and no one can ever tell you how many deer is enough. When they go hunting, and if they don't see deer, granted, we all want to see deer when we go hunting. You want to see them, but um, there are places that people are seeing scores of deer on a hunt, and their habitat is vastly damaged, and body weights are declining, and those numbers need to be chiseled down a bit. So failure to harvest enough deer, especially early. Just taking a doe in we offer in Mississippi, we have a doe only season that is before our regular gun season. It's a primitive weapon, and if you're on DMAP, you can use modern firearm. But if you took that doe and let's do a little quick math, and you took her November 15th instead of January 15th, and you saved roughly 2 months, and so you're saving about 300 pounds of food by taking her a couple of months early. Now, when you factor how much a deer is eating in a day and you're wanting to save that food for a nice young 1 year old buck out there, um, if you're going, if you've got to take 15 or 20 does or whatever the number is off your property, the earlier the better during that season. So trying to remove them soon to leave more food for the deer that remain on the property to keep them healthier.
I've never thought about it that way. See, I learn something from you every time I talk to you. So, if somebody wants to cultivate deer and turkey on their property, what would you suggest that they plant both in the fall and then in the spring if they're, doing rotational on those open pasture areas?
So I'm a big fan of clovers. I am. And if we are on the supplemental plantings on food plots, and I do put food plots below habitat management in priority, Ashley. They should be managing their timber stands, managing their old fields. The food plots should be the supplement to that.
Okay.
They should be the areas that assist them in harvesting deer, and those food plots then having the clover in it kind of get the deer through the very hard time of they're right at the end of the season, but the bread and butter should be the rest of the property. So, but I'm a big fan of the cool season grasses mixed with clovers, like wheat and oats mixed with a white and a red, and that carrying through and having the insect component there for the turkeys in the spring, having the calcium, phosphorus, and protein out there for antler development. As soon as bucks lose those antlers, they're starting to regrow almost immediate. So having that burst that they need post-rut. So clover provides all of that. There are a lot of things you can plant, but clover is a very good one
Okay. All
across the board.
right. Okay. Good to know. Well, I think this has been incredibly informative today, and I always enjoy talking with you. I hope you will come on again and give us some
I would
updates on
like
these
to.
things. And if anyone wants to reach out to you with any questions specific to Mississippi, can you give them your email address?
Sure. It's William.McKinley, and that is WILLIAM.MCKINLEY. Yes, that is just like the old president. William.McKinley at WFP.ms.gov.
Awesome. William, thank you for being on with us today. And from all of us at Blood Origins, thank you for the good work you're doing. And please keep up the good work.
Thank you, Ashley.